My adoptive brother pretended to have brain cancer for months because I was accepted into university, causing our parents thousands of dollars in medical bills, but now, his adoption is being annulled. Hello, I need to vent somewhere, because no one in my family believes me, and I'm starting to question my own sanity. My brother Nelson, who is 21, has been sabotaging my life for years, and his latest stunt could have cost me my future career as a doctor. I'm 19, and Nelson has always played the role of the golden child in our family. Our parents adopted us both when we were little. I was 3, and he was 5. From the very first day, Nelson made it clear he didn't want a little sister tagging along everywhere. When I was 10 and won the school spelling bee, he suddenly claimed he had severe stomach pains just before I was to receive my prize. Our parents had to leave early to take him to the ER, and I went with them because I was still a child. The doctors said it was probably just gas. In middle school, I started playing the violin and improved a lot. The music teacher chose me for a solo in the winter concert, and I practiced for months. The night before the concert, Nelson said he felt pressure in his chest and couldn't breathe properly. We ended up spending the entire night in the ER with him, wondering if we would even make it to the performance. We didn't. Nelson was diagnosed with anxiety and given breathing exercises to do at home. In high school, new challenges arose. I focused on my grades and began volunteering at the local hospital. I knew I wanted to become a doctor, partly because of all the time I had spent in hospitals watching Nelson being examined for his supposed illnesses. I learned a lot about symptoms and medical procedures just by observing. I also learned how to tell when someone was exaggerating or making things up. In a strange way, Nelson had given me tools that might be useful as a doctor. It seemed like he had calmed down during my sophomore and junior years. He got into a decent university and lived away most of the year. I thought maybe he had grown out of his need to compete with me, and that he was finally becoming an adult. But that's not how things turned out. Last spring, I received the news I had worked toward for years. I was accepted into medical school. All my hard work had paid off, and I was beyond happy. Our parents were thrilled and began planning a celebration dinner. That's when Nelson made his move. The day after I received my acceptance letter, he returned from university unexpectedly. He looked terrible, pale, thin, and exhausted. He told our parents he had been hiding something serious so as not to worry them during finals. He claimed he had been experiencing severe headaches, vision problems, and memory loss for months. He said he had finally gone to the campus doctor, and they were concerned about a possible brain tumor. Our parents immediately went into full panic mode and began researching brain tumors online. Nelson took full advantage of the situation, stumbling when he walked, saying he couldn't remember certain words, and squinting as if the light hurt his eyes. The celebration dinner for my acceptance into medical school was postponed indefinitely. Instead, our house turned into a medical research center entirely devoted to Nelson's supposed brain tumor. That was what made me suspicious from the very start. Nelson had been posting party photos on social media just weeks before coming home. In those pictures, he looked perfectly healthy and happy, dancing, playing beer pong, and staying up late with friends. None of his posts mentioned headaches or vision problems. I also noticed that his symptoms seemed to worsen when our parents were present but improved when they left the room. One afternoon, when Mom and Dad went to the supermarket, I peeked through a small gap in his bedroom door. He was sitting normally, using his phone with no sign of vision problems and none of the look of someone suffering from severe headaches. The medical appointments started piling up. First, Nelson saw our family doctor, who referred him to a neurologist. The neurologist ordered an MRI, which came back normal. Instead of feeling relieved, he insisted that his symptoms were getting worse. He said the headaches were now accompanied by nausea and dizziness. During that time, my own preparations for medical school were pushed to the side. I had to complete several forms, arrange housing, and attend an orientation weekend, but every conversation with our parents was interrupted by updates on Nelson's condition or calls from doctors' offices. The neurologist referred him to an oncologist for a second opinion. More tests were ordered, blood work, another MRI with contrast, and something called a lumbar puncture. All the results came back normal. but Nelson kept insisting that something was still wrong. He started researching rare brain diseases online and suggesting them to the doctors. Meanwhile, I discovered something interesting. One day, he left his laptop open, and I saw his browsing history. He had been extensively researching the symptoms of brain tumors, not to understand his condition, but apparently to learn how to fake them better. He had searched for things like how long headaches should last, what kinds of vision problems brain tumors cause, and which symptoms doctors look for during neurological exams. I also found out that he had been lying to his friends at university about being home. His social media showed that he was supposedly still at school taking summer courses, but in reality, he was at home lying in bed and acting sick whenever our parents were nearby. I tried talking to our parents about my suspicions, but they shut me down immediately. Then something happened that confirmed what I had been thinking. I was helping Mom organize Nelson's medical paperwork when I found a printed email in his folder. It was supposedly from his university health center, documenting his initial complaint about headaches and vision problems. But the email address was wrong. I had been to that university health center when I visited him, and I remembered their actual email format. This email came from a Gmail address made to look official. Nelson had forged the document that started this entire medical saga. I printed a screenshot from the real health center's website showing their correct contact information. I planned to show this evidence to our parents. But before I could, Nelson announced that the doctors had found something concerning in his latest tests. He said there was a small anomaly that might indicate a rare form of brain cancer. Our parents were devastated. They began looking into treatment options and cancer centers. My medical school orientation weekend was cancelled because they needed me to help coordinate Nelson's care. That was when I realized I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let Nelson destroy my future along with everyone's peace of mind. I decided to conduct my own investigation to gather irrefutable proof of his deception. I started by calling his university health center directly. I pretended I was inquiring about my own medical records and casually asked about their email format and appointment procedures. The staff confirmed they never send medical information through Gmail, and that all official communications come from their university domain. Next, I installed a hidden camera in the living room where Nelson often lay, claiming he was too sick to move. For 3 days, I recorded hours of footage showing him getting up normally, walking without difficulty, and using his phone for long periods with no apparent vision problems. I also tracked his online activity using the browser history on the family computer. At times when he claimed to have severe symptoms, he was actually gaming online, watching videos, and chatting with friends. The final piece of evidence came from his own carelessness. One night, he left his phone unlocked while taking a shower. I found text messages between him and his college roommate in which he bragged about getting out of summer classes by pretending to be sick. He wrote that our parents were paying for expensive medical tests and that he was enjoying the attention and sympathy. Now I had concrete proof that Nelson had been faking his entire medical crisis. But I knew our parents wouldn't want to believe it. They had invested so much time, money, and emotional energy into his supposed illness that admitting they had been deceived would be devastating for them. Still, I was tired of him doing all of this out of jealousy, for attention, or whatever his reason was. I was tired of our parents chasing after every story he invented. I was going to show them everything, but I needed more ideas on how to make them truly see Nelson for who he was and stop falling for his lies over and over again. Update 1. I spent 2 days organizing all the evidence I had gathered and asked our parents to sit down for a serious conversation. I told them I had important information about Nelson's medical situation that they needed to see. Mom immediately became defensive and said she didn't want to hear any more of my theories about Nelson faking his symptoms. Dad was more willing to listen, perhaps because the thought of all those medical bills piling up was weighing on him. I started by showing them the forged email from the University Health Center. Mom's first reaction was to say that maybe Nelson had simply made a mistake with the email address, or that the center might have multiple contact methods. Then I showed them the text messages. There they were, Nelson's own words, bragging about fooling the doctors and enjoying the attention. The hidden camera recordings were what finally convinced them. Watching Nelson move around normally, use his phone with no vision problems, and show no signs of the supposed severe headaches was undeniable proof that he had been lying. Dad got up and left the room without saying a word. Mom started crying, unable to believe that Nelson would do something like this. She said she couldn't understand why he would put them through so much worry and expense. We decided to confront Nelson together that very night. When he came down for dinner, still acting weak and holding his head as if in pain, our parents sat him down and showed him the evidence. Nelson became angry and accused me of spying on him and violating his privacy. He said I was jealous of the attention he was getting and that I had gone too far just to discredit him. He tried to explain away each piece of evidence, claiming the fake email was a misunderstanding, that his messages were taken out of context, and that the footage only showed brief moments when his symptoms weren't as bad. But our parents no longer believed him. Then Dad demanded that he tell the truth about his health. When Nelson kept insisting he was sick, Mom lost her patience. She began yelling about all the money they had spent on medical tests, all the worry they had endured, and all the specialists whose time had been wasted treating him. That was when Nelson finally admitted he had been faking everything. But his confession only made things worse. He said it had all started because he was jealous of my acceptance into medical school and all the praise I was receiving. He claimed he was hurt by having to compete with me, since I always achieved good academic results. He said that even though we had both been adopted, our parents had always favored me because I looked more like them and was easier to raise. Our parents were devastated by this accusation. They tried to explain that they had never treated us differently because of our adoption, but Nelson refused to listen. He said that years of watching me receive praise for my achievements while he struggled in school had damaged his self-esteem. The conversation turned into a shouting match, Nelson accusing our parents of emotional neglect, our parents accusing him of manipulation and lies, and me stuck in the middle as accusations flew in every direction. The worst part was when Nelson turned his anger toward me. He accused me of volunteering at hospitals just for show, not because I genuinely cared about helping people. The confrontation ended with Nelson storming out of the house. He said he was going back to university and never wanted to see us again. Our parents sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and heartbroken. In the days that followed, we tried to process what had happened. My parents apologized to me for not believing me sooner and for letting Nelson's fake illness overshadow my acceptance into medical school. They said they had been so afraid of losing him that they ignored the warning signs I had tried to point out. Meanwhile, Nelson had returned to university, but not to attend the summer classes he had originally claimed. Instead, he had moved in with some friends and was apparently spending his time partying and avoiding all contact with our family. I eventually managed to attend a makeup orientation session at medical school, but the entire experience was clouded by the family drama. My classmates were excited and optimistic about starting their medical training, while I was still thinking about everything that had happened. The financial impact on our family was significant. Our parents had spent thousands of dollars on medical tests, specialist appointments, and procedures Nelson never needed. Most disturbing of all was finding out that Nelson had also lied about other things. Our parents learned that he had failed several classes at university and was on academic probation. The summer courses he claimed to be taking didn't exist. He had used his fake illness as an excuse to avoid facing his academic problems. They also found out that he had been borrowing money from relatives, telling them about his supposed brain tumor diagnosis. Several aunts and uncles had sent him cash to help with medical expenses that were entirely fictitious. As I write this update, it has been 3 weeks since the confrontation, and Nelson still hasn't contacted our family. Our parents have tried calling him, but he hasn't answered their calls or replied to their messages. Next week, I start medical school. But instead of feeling excited about this new chapter in my life, it's all just drama. I don't know what will happen with Nelson, or whether our family will ever fully recover from this betrayal, especially the financial impact. At this point, I think my parents should hold Nelson accountable in some way, but I don't know if they'll be able to do it. Update 2. I've been in medical school for 6 months now, and while I'm doing well academically, the family drama continues. About a month after my last update, Nelson finally contacted our parents, but instead of apologizing or trying to make amends, he called to say that he was in the hospital. He claimed he'd had severe abdominal pain and had gone to the ER near his university. Supposedly, the doctors had found signs of appendicitis and were preparing to operate. The person who supposedly called from the hospital was speaking on Nelson's behalf and said he wanted them to come see him. Our parents were torn, wanting to support him if he was truly sick, but fearing this might be another manipulation. They called me at school to ask what I thought they should do. I told them I couldn't know for sure if he was lying this time, though it was likely, but if they decided to go, they should not pay for anything. Mom and Dad drove the 4 hours to Nelson's college town and went straight to the hospital. When they arrived, they discovered that Nelson was not registered as a patient. The ER staff had no record of anyone with his name being treated for appendicitis, or for anything else. Our parents spent the next several hours trying to track him down. They called his friends, checked his apartment, and even contacted campus security. Eventually, one of his roommates admitted that Nelson had asked him to make the call, pretending to be from the hospital. They found him at a local bar, perfectly healthy and apparently surprised that our parents had actually driven there to check on him. When confronted, he claimed it had just been a joke to see if they still cared about him after everything that had happened. This second deception was the last straw for our parents. Dad told Nelson he was cutting off all financial support, including tuition and living expenses. Mom told him she could no longer trust anything he said, and that he needed to seek professional help if he wanted any relationship with the family in the future. Nelson's reaction was to say our parents were overreacting and that it was just a harmless joke that shouldn't be taken so seriously. The confrontation ended with the bar staff asking Nelson to leave because he was causing a scene. Our parents drove back that same night, and Mom cried for most of the trip. When they returned, they told me something that explained a lot about Nelson's behavior. They said his biological parents had abandoned him when he was 4 years old, leaving him at a relative's house and never coming back. He had spent nearly a year in foster care before our parents adopted him. They said the social worker had warned them that Nelson might have attachment issues and fear of abandonment, but they believed their love and stability would help him overcome those traumas. Now they wondered if his pattern of inventing medical emergencies was his way of testing whether they would abandon him too. I might see Nelson differently now, but that doesn't excuse the damage he has caused. Understanding why someone acts destructively doesn't make the destruction any less real. Meanwhile, the financial fallout from Nelson's lies kept piling up. Our parents had to take out a loan to cover the medical bills from the fake brain tumor ordeal. They also lost money on non-refundable deposits for the summer classes that didn't exist. Worse, some relatives Nelson had borrowed money from began demanding repayment once they learned the brain tumor had been a lie. They wanted their money back immediately. The stress was taking a toll on my parents' health and relationship. Mom began having trouble sleeping and lost weight from worry. Dad wasn't doing much better. They began arguing over how to handle the situation with Nelson and whether they were, in some way, responsible for his behavior. During fall break, I came home and found that the house felt completely different. The atmosphere was tense and sad. They asked me about my classes and tried to show interest in my medical studies, but I could tell they were distracted, still worried about Nelson. I also found out that Nelson had been contacting other family members with new versions of his story. Each new lie required our parents to do damage control. The worst part was that Nelson seemed to be getting worse, not better. His lies were becoming more elaborate and more desperate. Things came to a head when Nelson called our parents one night saying he planned to harm himself. He claimed he couldn't live with the pain of being rejected by his family, and that he would rather end his life than continue suffering. Our parents were terrified and immediately called emergency services in Nelson City. Police and paramedics were sent to his apartment for a wellness check, but they found Nelson at a party, apparently having a good time with friends. When asked about his suicide threats, he said it was a misunderstanding. This incident convinced our parents that Nelson needed professional intervention. But by then, they were in no position to help him get it. They had already spent so much money dealing with the consequences of his lies that they couldn't afford private treatment. They tried connecting him with mental health services through his university, but Nelson refused to cooperate. He insisted he didn't need help, that the problem wasn't him, but our family. As I write this update, it has been 3 weeks since Nelson last had any contact with the family. We don't know where he's living or how he's supporting himself. Update 3, my parents have been debating what to do about my brother, but I haven't. What he did has affected me directly. The turning point came 3 months ago when Nelson made a decision that crossed a line I cannot forgive. Nelson contacted the administration of my medical school directly, trying to get me expelled. In his complaint, he claimed that I had gotten into medical school through fraudulent means, specifically, by lying about my volunteer work and exaggerating my achievements. He suggested that the school should thoroughly investigate my background before allowing me to continue in the program. The school administration took his complaint seriously, as they should. They called me in for a meeting and presented Nelson's accusations. I had to do extra work, which took away from my study time, to prove that all the information in my application was truthful. I was shocked at the level of detail and sophistication in his lies. Fortunately, I had learned from our past experiences with his deceptions. I had kept copies of all the evidence I'd gathered about his fake brain tumor, including the text messages where he admitted to lying and bragged about deceiving our family. Even so, it wasn't easy to disprove his claims. The school's investigation lasted 2 weeks, the most stressful 2 weeks of my life. I made the decision to sue him. My parents supported my decision, even though it was hard for them. They had also reached their breaking point with Nelson's behavior, especially after learning of his attempt to sabotage my medical education. That's why they decided to sue him as well, for all the expenses they had incurred because of his so-called jokes. Luckily, my grades are excellent and I have good relationships with both my classmates and professors, so his attempt to attack me didn't have as much impact as he had hoped. Still, I don't want to live in constant worry about what his next big idea might be. As for my parents, I'm glad they've finally decided to take legal action against him. If he pulls stunts like this and no one stops him, he will keep doing it, because to him, it's just fun and games, while my parents are drowning in debt. So even though those 2 weeks were nerve-wracking for me, at least now my parents are taking action. It's not ideal, they should have done it long ago, but it's better than nothing. Update 4, of all the things I have to share about Nelson, the one that has shocked me the most is that my parents have filed to annul his adoption. I didn't think they would go that far, but they did, citing fraud, and a judge granted it, as this was an extreme case where they no longer wanted to be legally connected to him. It doesn't have major consequences, since any potential will can be changed to leave him nothing, and because he's an adult, it's not like my parents are still legally responsible for him. But they had endured too much, and even their marriage was suffering. After months of therapy, they decided to take this step. I'm not sure how I feel about it, because regardless of the fact that he's no longer legally my brother, I haven't really considered him one for a long time. As for my lawsuit, I've won a judgment requiring Nelson to compensate me with over $5,000 for his attempt to harm me. Medical school is expensive, and that amount doesn't even cover a month, but at least I have a document stating that I won a case against my ex-brother, which I think will be useful in the future if he ever tries to come after me again. I don't think he will, since he's no longer part of the family, but I won't complain. In fact, winning this lawsuit after everything he's done is extremely symbolic. I think that matters to me more than the money itself. As for my parents, that's another story. I don't know exactly how much money they lost because of Nelson, but their lawsuit brought them close to $40,000, money he doesn't have and will have to pay back in installments. My parents are happy with that, though I'm not sure if it covers all their losses or if it's simply more than they expected to recover. They've told me they want to use that money to help with my school expenses. I have a partial scholarship that covers only a small portion, and loans they co-signed, loans that were affected by the delay Nelson caused with his fake illness. I don't know if they're doing it out of guilt or simply because they genuinely want to help, but either way, I'm grateful. Anyone in medical school knows how expensive it can be. I don't know much about Nelson now. I've avoided contact with him, and my parents have done the same. The only contact will be about paying his debt. As far as we know, he dropped out of university once my parents stopped supporting him. He also had some student loans, but that's all we know. Honestly, the less I know about him, the better. Sometimes I think his brain cancer might have actually been real, because it's the only thing that explains his behavior.